Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 6, the integumentary system. So the integumentary system is the first organ system we get to talk about. And what this means is we're now entering organ systems, which is what everybody's looking forward to in anatomy and physiology. We're done with all of the general biology material, and we're into organ systems. This is a one-chapter organ system, and it's relatively a fun, interesting system, but not too complex. So it's a nice system to start with. The integumentary system consists of our skin, so the skin that surrounds our body. And then it has multiple derivatives, including hair, nails, sweat glands, sebaceous glands. And we'll talk about all of these structures. Frank, enough. That's my dog. Sorry, he wants to be part of this. The integumentary system is also known as your cutaneous membrane. I should say the integument is your cutaneous membrane. So remember, we have four membranes, serous membranes that surround all of the organs in your body that don't have an opening to the outside. You have the synovial membranes that surround the joints, the movable joints. We have mucous membranes that surround all of the regions of the body that have an opening to the external environment. And then we have the cutaneous membrane, the only dry membrane. What are some of the functions of the skin? The skin main function that most everybody knows is it's protective. It is the first line of defense. It protects us from pathogens getting into the body. It protects us from chemicals. It protects us from radiation. So it's very protective. One of the proteins in the skin that makes it so protective is keratin. Keratin is made by the keratinocytes, which are the most common cells of our skin, or of our epidermis. And this protects us, or it gives us a waterproofing structure so that we don't take in too much water and we don't dehydrate super fast. The acid mantle is produced by our sweat glands that secrete slightly acidic chemicals to the surface of our skin. So we always have a slightly acidic environment on our skin. And so microbes that are trying to gain access to our body can't replicate as effectively in this acid mantle. Vitamin D. So our skin actually helps in producing vitamins. The vitamin that we produce is vitamin D, which is the active form is known as calcitriol. So vitamin D and calcitriol are the same. And vitamin D helps us to absorb calcium. So it starts when our keratinocytes take in UV radiation. So when UV radiation hits our skin, the keratinocytes secrete a chemical called cholecalciferol, which is a pre-vitamin D. This is going to be released, enters our blood, and is transported to the liver. From there, it is converted to another intermediate molecule and is moved to the kidneys. And then in the kidneys, it is converted to calcitriol, which is then released anytime our calcium levels in our blood decreases. So vitamin D is a hormone that is released, or acts as a hormone, which is released when our calcium levels in our body are too low. And it helps in increasing blood calcium levels. Sensations. Our skin is the largest sense organ that we have and can detect things such as touch, and is very sensitive. Certain regions of our skin are so sensitive that two different touches near each other can be distinguished from each other. Our skin also functions in thermal regulation. So if it gets too hot, then our skin, the blood vessels that are deep to the skin, deep to the epidermis, will vasodilate and will allow for the release of heat to the surface of our skin, which we then can get rid of. And then if it's cold, those same blood vessels will vasoconstrict so that the heat will stay in the body, which is what causes paleness. Skin is the first thing that you notice. Come on, Hank, you can get up here. Sorry, that's my dog again. Skin is the first thing that you notice on an individual. And so it has a lot of, or gives off nonverbal communication. If we are pale, typically a lot of people would say you're not feeling well or you're cold. If you are flushed, you might have a fever, or you might have just finished exercising, having a bad hair day, probably not having a great day in general. Birthmarks, acne can be seen on the skin, can tell us a little bit about the individual. And then we have transdermal absorption. So this is our skin actually can take in certain chemicals, birth control patches, pain patches, as well as smoking cessation patches, can be absorbed through our skin into the adipose tissue that's in the hypodermis region. So the integument is the largest organ of the body. It's one large organ. It weighs almost, very close to 10% of our body weight. So about 7 to 8% of our body weight is just our skin. It can range on an individual in thickness, in color, and we'll talk about the differences. Some regions of the skin can have certain markings that distinguish one individual from another, another individual. Moles are an example, birthmarks, freckles. And so we'll talk about these different things as we go through the integument. The integument has 3 basic layers to it, really 2 only, but the third, the hypodermis, is another layer that we do typically talk about here. So there's all 4 tissue types in the integument. The epidermis is composed completely of epithelial tissue, stratified squamous epithelium. Then we have deep to the stratified squamous epithelium, the areolar connective tissue makes up the basement membrane and helps in producing these tiny little epidermal ridges. We have, in the majority of the dermis, we have irregular connective tissue. And then we have smooth muscles, these erector pili muscles, that are, that help to control the hair follicles. We have nervous tissue, so we have receptors in our skin. We have receptors in our skin that help to detect pressure, temperature changes, pain. That's all 4 tissue types right there. The three basic layers of the integument are the epidermis, the dermis, and then the subcutaneous layer, or the hypodermis. Though it's not actually part of the integument, the subcutaneous layer is discussed here. So the epidermis is composed of stratified squamous epithelium. The dermis is composed of areolar connective tissue and dense irregular connective tissue. The subcutaneous region, which is the deepest region that connects the skin to underlying organs, is composed of adipose connective tissue and areolar connective tissue. So here you can see the skin. This is the epidermis. So from these cells way down here all the way up to the surface is the stratified squamous epithelium. It's stratified squamous because it's multiple layers, and it's squamous because the top layers are flat. It is keratinized, so it's a dry membrane. Deep to that, we have the areolar connective tissue, which is this papillary layer, which also helps in producing these dermal papilla, or these epidermal ridges. See that? Or that make the epidermal ridges, I should say. The deepest region of the dermis is the reticular region, which is composed of dense irregular connective tissue. This is the area that has the majority of the sweat glands. This is the region that has the blood vessels. All of this, the entire dermis has blood vessels. Has a lot of our deep pressure and pain receptors. We do have some pressure receptors that are up close as well. And then we have that subcutaneous layer down here, which is composed of adipose and areolar connective tissue. There's the epidermis. You can see it. If we take the epidermis away, there's the dermis. It looks really thick in the diagram, but it's a really thin region. And then there's the hypodermis. Taking the dermis away, we have that hypodermis region. So we're going to focus on the epidermis first, then we'll talk about the dermis. The epidermis is composed of predominantly keratinized stratified squamous epithelial cells. Because they are keratinized, the cells at the surface, as they move up, they die. And so all the cells at the apical surface are dead cells. The epidermis has very few nerve endings. The main ones are for either pain or for pressure. There is diffusion of nutrients in the lower layers of the epidermis. So it's only the lower layers, the basal membrane, basal layer, and that's going to actually be able to get enough nutrients for mitosis to occur, because epithelial tissue lacks blood vessels. In the epidermis, we have about 5 different types of cells. We have stem cells. Stem cells are stem cells are the cells that give rise to the keratinocytes, and these are only found in the stratum basal. We have keratinocytes. Keratinocytes are the majority of the cells in the epidermis, and they make keratin. That's their major job. They synthesize keratin. As they move up from the basement membrane, they fill with keratin, and eventually they will die. We have melanocytes, which are only going to be found in the stratum basal. Melanocytes produce melanin, which gives pigment to our skin, but it also protects us from UV radiation. So one major function of melanin is to protect us. It's like our own built-in sunblock. We have tactile cells, which are found attached to the basal layer of the epidermis. These are cells that have receptors, neuron receptors, that will take in signals of pressure or pain and send them to the brain. And then we have dendritic cells. Dendritic cells are the white blood cell macrophages of the epidermis. They're found in the stratum spinosum layer mainly, and they protect us from pathogen entry. So I think here we have the stem cells. You can see them. They look like they're undergoing mitosis right there. Here we have melanocytes. So everyone has about the same number of melanocytes. The difference in the skin color is associated with the amount of melanin produced by those melanocytes. There's tactile cells that send signals to the nervous system to tell us if we have pain or pressure of any sort. We have dendritic cells. These are the white blood cell macrophages that eat any pathogens. We have keratinocytes, living and dead. So in the basal layer, in the stratum spinosum layer, we have living cells. And then as we move up into the granulosum layer, the amount of granules that are found, the amount of carotene granules starts to overtake the cell, and the cell starts to die. So in the stratum lucidium, we have this precursor to the keratin called elutein that will fill the cell, and all these cells are going to be dead. And then the stratum corneum, we have all dead skin cells as well. And so at the very tip, you can see these cells, skin cells that are sloughing off. Our skin is constantly sloughing off, so we're always replacing skin with new cells. If we look at the epidermis, from the deepest layer to the most superficial, there are 5 layers in thick skin, 4 layers in thin skin. Stratum basal is the deepest layer. It's also known as the germination layer because the cells undergo mitosis. Stratum spinosum is the thickest layer, and some of those cells can also undergo mitosis. Then we have the stratum granulosum, where we start seeing cells die. Stratum lucidium, only in thick skin, and then the stratum corneum. There's your image of skin. This is thick skin here because it has a stratum lucidium. Stratum lucidium is only found in thick skin, not thin. So the deepest layer is the stratum basal. And this layer, it undergoes mitosis constantly. We're always reproducing the basal layer to take over for the cells that have been sloughed off. It says all 3 cell types, which is silly. It has 4 different cell types. So these 3 cells plus the tactile cells, which are associated with that layer. Okay. The stratum basal is attached to the dermis by the basement membrane, which is areolar connective tissue. And, well, that's all I really want to say about that, I think. So I'm going to go to the next one. Sorry, that was kind of like slow there. Keratinocytes are found in the stratum basal. These are the cells that produce keratin. Keratin is the protein that strengthens and produces that waterproofing coating of the skin, protective membrane. Melanocytes produce melanin. Melanin is a pigment that helps in giving our skin its color. It also protects us from UV radiation. The more melanin we produce, the more protection we have from the UV radiation. Tactile cells, known as Merkel cells, are your pressure cells that detect stimulus whenever we have any pressure put on our skin, or if the skin changes, has any pain associated with it. Stratum spinosum also can undergo mitosis, but only the deepest layer of the stratum spinosum can undergo mitosis. It is the thickest layer of the epidermis. It's where the majority of our macrophage dendritic cells are going to be located. Dendritic cells are white blood cells of the integument. They're your immune system cells that protect us and that can initiate immune responses if skin is attacked by anything. Stratum granulosum is the layer of the skin where we start seeing keratinization. So as the cells are filling with keratin, this causes our organelles to start to die, and the nucleus eventually will degenerate as well, and this will cause the cells to die. So by the time we reach the surface of the granulosum layer, we have dead cells. Stratum lucidium is the layer that's only found in thick skin, so it's not found in thin skin at all. And it has a precursor to the mature keratin called iridium. This is going to help in protecting those areas where we have thick skin. So the areas that we have thick skin are like on the palms of our hands, the soles of our feet have thick skin. The majority of our body has thin skin. And then we have the stratum corneum. This is the most superficial layer. This is going to be what we see on the apical surface. These are all dead keratinized cells that are packed together, and they provide that waterproofing layer. They do have pores that are associated with the keratinocytes of the stratum corneum. Those pores allow us to secrete things like sweat, and then in the hair follicles we have oils, and that can be secreted from there or into those areas. So we're constantly shedding skin. Once we produce the cells in the basal membrane, it takes approximately a month for those cells to move up to the surface of our skin and then to shed. So what that means is every month we are putting on a new skin. So you've seen snakes, when they shed, they just take their entire skin off, and they just, they have a perfect layer of skin that just comes off within one coating. That's how lizards shed. We also shed, but we shed little by little. And the majority of the dust that's found in your house is actually skin cells that have been shed from your body. So whenever you're breathing in dust, you're actually, eating human in a sense. Kind of creepy there, but it's really cool. So from the time these stem cells, it's right there. No. Where's the stem cell? I don't see a stem cell down here, do I? Nope. All right. By the time a stem cell actually starts to divide, or divides, and then the cell moves all the way to the most apical surface, it's been about 1 month. So we've already replaced all of those cells. So we're constantly replacing new cells, and those cells are being shed from our skin constantly. There are some variations to the epidermis, so they can vary between individuals and between regions of the body. The main variations are going to be the thickness of the skin, colorings of the skin, and markings on the skin. So thick and thin skin. Thick skin is found on our hands, on our feet, so palms, soles, as well as on the fingers and toes. They're going to have all thick skin. Thick skin has no hair follicles at all, which means there's no oil glands, because oil glands are only associated with regions of the body that have hair. And so you look at your hands, you'll never see hair on the palms of your hands or on the soles of your feet because there's no hair follicles there. But there are sweat glands, and it's sweat glands that produce the sweat. Sweat glands help in producing or allowing you to see your fingerprints. So without the sweat glands, we wouldn't see the fingerprints effectively. Which is why when we do our lab and we're looking at fingerprints, I tell people not to wash their hands. Thin skin covers the majority of the body. It doesn't have that stratum lucidum. It has sweat glands and hair follicles and oil-producing glands called sebaceous glands. So we have all of that. Thin skin is what you find on the majority of the body, other than your hands and feet, the soles of your feet, the palms of your hands. Okay. Coloring. So there are different chemicals that actually produce color in skin. Hemoglobin is an oxygen binding compound or protein that's found in red blood cells. And when it has oxygen associated with it, it colors, it makes a bright red color. And when our body heats up, that heat is moved by the blood to the surface of the skin. So when the blood vessels dilate, more blood runs to the surface of the skin, and that causes our skin to get a reddish coloration. Melanin is a pigment molecule that's produced by melanocytes, and it can secrete chemicals, or the melanocytes secrete melanin. The different types of melanin, or the different amounts of melanin. So genetically, you can produce different colorations. And then the amount of melanin is going to increase the color or change the color. So this is what produces all the different colors that we see in individuals, from very dark color, black, to very pale colors, like beige or tan. Melanin moves from the melanocytes up to the surface of the skin, and we produce more melanin when we are exposed to UV radiation, which is why if you go to tanning beds or you tan outside, your skin color darkens. Carotene is another name for vitamin A. Vitamin A, or carotene, is found in those yellow and orange vegetables like carrots, squash has a lot of vitamin A. Vitamin A is really important in immune system function because it decreases the amount of free radicals. Free radicals are things like oxygen atoms that they're unstable, and they want to bind with another atom or molecule so that they are more stable. And so what they do is they bind with other molecules in the cells, like your DNA or your plasma membrane, and this can cause damage to the cell. It can also lead to diseases like cancer. Vitamin A is important in vision. We need vitamin A so that we can produce the proper proteins used in vision. So there's my antioxidant, the free radical binding, and then the antioxidant binds with the free radical, and this protects the, makes the free radical no longer unstable. It becomes stable. And then vitamin A is also important in vision. In some countries that have very little nutrition in their diet, so they don't get all the nutrients, people have gone blind because they didn't have vitamin A. Without vitamin A, we can't produce the proper proteins needed for vision. And so what we've done is we have actually converted some foods to foods that contain vitamin A in them. So like rice, we have hybridized rice with vitamin A, so that now when people eat the rice, they get vitamin A along with the carbohydrate. And carotene overload. So anytime you have, if you've ever heard, there's water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins. Water-soluble vitamins go right through your system, so they don't cause toxic problems. But fat-soluble vitamins will cause problems. Fat-soluble vitamins will actually can sit in the fatty tissue of the body, so in that hypodermal region. And if you have too much vitamin A in your diet, so you're eating, say, too many carrots, then that's going to cause your skin to actually be converted to an orange color. So it's toxic, but it doesn't cause severe problems. Other vitamins can be more problematic. The last thing we'll talk about in this video will be the epidermal ridges. So the epidermis, if you look at your fingers, they have these tiny ridges on them. The ridges actually are called friction ridges that are produced for the purpose of holding materials. If you had smooth fingers, then you wouldn't be able to hold things as effectively. So they actually help you in grasping. That being said, each individual has their own type of fingerprints. So no two individuals other than identical twins will have identical fingerprints. And this is why people have used fingerprinting as a form of identification for a long time. These friction ridges, or these fingerprints, are formed by the folding of the dermal region. So here's the epidermal ridges, and they're caused by these dermal papilla that are here that cause the fingerprints or those ridges to form at the surface of the skin. All right, we're going to stop here, and I'll start on the next video, and we'll talk about the dermis.